Representative Courtney has been a devoted public servant for Norwich, Eastern Connecticut, and our country in his tenure in Congress. He has consistently worked to enhance our national security, support working families, and investing in the future of our economy. Elected in 2006 to represent Connecticut's 2nd Congressional District, Congressman Courtney currently serves on both the House Armed Services Committee and the House Education and Workforce Committee. As the ranking member of the House Armed Services Subcommittee, he plays a key role in overseeing crucial Seapower and Projection Forces, including recent efforts to increase submarine production. He also co-chairs the bipartisan Congressional Shipbuilding Caucus, furthering his leadership in the defense industry. In addition, Congressman Courtney leads the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development and the Subcommittee on Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions, ensuring that all generations in our state are well represented and well supported. It is my pleasure to welcome Congressman Joe Courtney to share a few words with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Chris, for the kind introduction, and to Tony and his great staff for the invitation to be here today. Obviously, just going around the room a little bit before, I mean, people are kind of bursting with questions, and look forward to hopefully doing my best to help sort of at least provide information. I want to thank Tony particularly for really starting off by a moment of silence for the 67 Americants who lost their lives last night. I don't know if some of you it came across the news wires, but actually one of the decedents actually is from Salem, Connecticut, a gentleman by the name of Casey Crafton, who his father lives in Salem with 3 kids, very active in sports, and obviously very wonderful guy, and was in Wichita, which is a real aerospace hub, as I think many of you probably know in the room there, and was on a business trip. Used to work at Pratt in Middletown, and I just can't imagine what his family is going through right now. So I'm sure all of us will keep them in our prayers and do what we can to support their family in this time. So when Tony first called and said, hey, we got some time in January, can you come over and do an update, can talk about maybe what, sort of the end of the year sort of measures that got through in Congress, particularly, some of the defense-related issues, which, as Chris said, I spent a lot of time working at. And that seems like a century ago in a galaxy far, far away, in terms of, what happened at the end of December. But I've had a couple quick slides just to sort of at least, for a moment, footstop some work that we were able to get done. Obviously, it was a tough Congress, very slow-moving and polarized, but at the very end, when we passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the annual bill that basically sets the rules for all the military branches, except for the Coast Guard. Someday we're going to get them covered in the NDAA. But big focus this year was on service member quality of life. People who follow this closely, and I know Captain Curtin is here, some of his team, and 2023 was a terrible year for all the service branches in terms of recruitment. The Navy was about 7,000 short, Army was double that, Air Force was low, and over the time, people have been sort of starting to hear anecdotally about issues that particularly junior enlisted members and families have been experiencing, which, given, again, the recruitment and retention issue, I think it was high time to sort of focus in terms of, what steps could be taken to improve quality of life and make it more attractive. So after about a 2-year process, very bipartisan, in the bill this year, I think we took a pretty impressive step forward in terms of listening to service members. By the way, Captain Curtin hosted for me service member gathering where heard from spouses, and members, again, about some of these issues that were there. And some of that was incorporated into the final package. So junior enlisted, which are like E3 and below, got a 14.5% pay raise. Again, over time, usually the pay raises are given out with a single sort of formula, like 2% one year, 3% the other year. Again, if you're an officer a little bit further up in the salary ranks, that actually is a nice boost. But if you're someone who's an E1, 2, or 3, really that doesn't really do much. And it was pretty clear that if you looked at the wage differential for a new enlisted service member versus what's in the local economy, really it was too compressed. And really the feeling was we need to kind of rebase, particularly for the lower end. So the 14.5% pay raise was included in there. There was also other life improvements in terms of, and this I heard a lot in Groton, was the fact that the daycare programs, really needed help in terms of more teachers, more slots. Really high-quality programs that are there, but, and again, this is something that in military installations all across the country and overseas, was definitely a pretty recurring issue. Housing allowance, again, for people who live off base. Again, you have to, if you're an enlisted person, you got to pay about 5 to 10% of the rent out of pocket. That's there, so it was basically bumped up to 100% housing allowance to make it again more affordable for people who were serving there. And at the end of the day, it was something that people actually felt really proud of, that we did something pretty special, in terms of really helping people who do really important work. I mean, I'm sure Captain Curtin and his team would, agree that you can't make our system work without particularly having these junior enlisted folks, trained up and ready to and stay focused on their job, not worried about their families that are there. We also, again, in the shipbuilding account, had actually an eye-watering year, $17 billion for the two programs that, again, General Dynamics is the general contractor for Columbia and Virginia. Included in that similar issue for sort of new metal trades workers was language that said some of this money had to be used for a wage improvement for new starts in terms of people who've been going through some of these great programs that we have in the region, the Workforce Board, Manufacturing Pipeline. But same thing, if you're starting out, as a semi-skilled welder or whatever, I mean, you're making about $21 an hour, $22 an hour. That's something you can probably match in the local economy. And, particularly on cold days like this, it's hard work down there. And the language in there that basically talks about a wage increase for frontline shipyard workers, that's the wage improvement language. Right now, Navy, Electric Boat, and Newport News down in Virginia, they're kind of working out the details in terms of implementing that, and we're hoping to see that actually in pocket for people sometime in the spring. And lastly, the AUKUS security agreement, which is the joint agreement between the UK, Australia, and the US, which Congress moved very fast in 2023 to get those pieces in place. And there was more language, again, strengthening that alliance. And it's happening in real time. Again, as Captain Curtin knows, we got Aussies at sub base going through sub school right now. They're just super enthusiastic and actually overachieving to the extent that they're surpassing, I think, the U.S. Sailors and officers that are going through the classes that are there. And I know, this gets some coverage locally here. It is front page news in Australia, and that is a fact. Okay, the graduation ceremonies, the fact that there's Australian shipyard workers now working in U.S. shipyards, which is part of the AUKUS plan. That's there. This is a big deal to a great ally, and I've spent a lot of time working with the embassy in terms of getting these measures through, because it did require congressional authorization. So that was, again, kind of got you out of bed in the morning in terms of working on the Hill. So the next slide, again, talks about another change, and then I'll start talking about where we are today. But starting on January 1st, the prescription drug program for folks on Medicare, again, took a big step forward with a cap of $2,000 out of pocket. Under the Medicare Part D program, there was no cap. before this kicked in. And, if you're a family or a patient that, is dealing with a chronic illness like MS, a cancer, whatever, I mean, the Part D program's great, but, there was no cap. So, I mean, these drug costs are just, out of sight. And so having a $2,000 cap, again, which was paid for and offset when the law was passed in 2022, we're really making progress in terms of, helping people on Medicare who, again, from the day I got elected in 2006 to today, that is still a recurring issue that we hear about day in and day out. I was at a senior center up in Ellington, up near where I live the other day, and again, you could have heard a pin drop in the room as we were sort of walking through the changes in this program. And again, there's 25 medications that have been selected for negotiation this year. We'll see, if that holds. Ozempic is on the list, which is an important medication for diabetes and weight loss. And we'll see. Lastly, I don't know if there's any teachers, retired teachers, former teachers, police officers in the room, but we also passed the Social Security Fairness Act at the end of December, which basically fixed a real unfairness that was in the Social Security system going back to 1983, where if you had a separate public pension program, despite the fact that you may have paid into quarters to Social Security from a prior job or a different career, basically the way the law was written in 1983, those retired teachers basically got nothing, okay? And even though it's an earned benefit and they had paid into it, and we finally fixed that. It's about 3 million Americans that benefited from that change. Again, it's the minute President Biden signed it into law, again, the phones were blowing up about, okay, when, because there's a one-year reach back. And people are like, well, when do I get my check? And, what's the change going to be? It's going to take about a year for this thing to get sort of through the system, because you're everyone's different. So it's going to be a bit of a complicated task. Hopefully, they had a hiring freeze over there, and it's painful to sort of see that, because we have a very sort of front row seat to constituents, not just people affected by this new law, but just regular Social Security beneficiaries, how it is so important to have people, and we've got great people in New London, who are at the office there that we work with, and again, this adds to their work pile. So hopefully, we're going to keep supporting that workforce in the days ahead. Okay, so now we'll flip to the front page of today's news, which I know I was asked about a lot here today. So on Monday evening at 8 o'clock, one of my staff sent me the memo that said that all federal grants except for Medicare and Social Security are going to be paused, basically it was just an explosion. I was in a Head Start program the next morning by coincidence, again, which is a completely federally funded program with staff. Their heads were spinning. I was over at UCFS, which again is a federally qualified health center. So a lot of their funding that keeps the doors on, at least temporarily, their portal for getting funding was shut down during the day on Tuesday. I was up at UConn yesterday. They have researchers up there that get federal grants, sizable. I mean, sometimes people aren't aware of that much about just how much, first of all, we should be very proud of the fact we've got such a great research university. But again, the federal funds is what basically drives all that work. And they're doing really important stuff on autism, opioid addiction, helping kids with disabilities. Again, it was a school of education and the physical therapy groups that were there. Those have been frozen and are still frozen as I'm standing here right now. And that's staff, that's graduate student employees that again are right now just totally in limbo as a result of that. So. The blowback was from coast to coast. Talking, again, we weren't in session on Monday or this week, but certainly, talking to folks and, texting with friends, Republican governors who are just as, care about Medicaid reimbursements coming into their state budgets, and Head Start and all the other stuff. We're calling their senators and congressmen like, what the hell is going on? And then obviously the lawsuit was filed, which put a temporary stay, and just like that, the memo was rescinded. But as I said about UConn, it is not completely rescinded, and President Trump's press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, made that pretty clear, that the only thing that was paused or rescinded was the pause that was in the memo on Monday night. There are a whole slew of other executive orders that are adding conditions to federal grants and programs, DEI, climate change, just the list, which I'm sure you've all seen in the newspapers that are there. And that's right now what a lot of groups like the folks at UConn are wrestling with in terms of just, first of all, is that legal to suddenly put new conditions on? And how do you comply? And should we comply with it? Wait for the courts? I mean, it's a very sort of uncertain, really almost chaotic moment. Last night, the state of Connecticut's DOT got notification that infrastructure funding, which Chris talked about, that's what was funding the wastewater treatment facility in Norwich and the natural gas pipeline, is now going to have new conditions also added to it. And I had to read it twice to make sure I was reading it right. But they said they are going to be, it's the new Transportation Secretary, Duffy, said that they're going to be looking at states who have higher birth rates and marriage rates in terms of qualifying for the funding that's already, again, was enacted into law. So, and as I said, this just kind of creates just a whole, question mark and uncertainty around, projects, and I could tick them off right now. The old Saybrook Bridge, Gold Star Bridge, it's just all across the district are still, in process and moving forward. And now, again, new conditions are being announced by the administration. So, to me, this thing, at some point we can sort of go through and torture ourselves, by program in terms of what's going on. But fundamentally, there's something more fundamental that's going on here. And this slide, really are the two pillars in terms of who has the authority to spend money. Okay, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution states very clearly that the power of the purse resides in the congressional branch, Article 1. And it has been such settled law that there's really not that much Supreme Court litigation around it. There is some. In 1974, when the Nixon administration tried to hold back some infrastructure money to the city of New York, it's a case Train versus New York City. The court ruled 9-0 that that was unconstitutional, that Congress had voted into law a spending bill, an appropriations package, and that's the law. And the president's duty under Article 2 is to, quote unquote, faithfully execute the laws of this country. That's actually the oath of office that a president takes when they take on the presidency. And then just to sort of add to the legal power of this question is that because of the impoundments that were going on during the Nixon administration, Congress actually stepped up and passed a law, the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which again clearly stated that they do not have, any president doesn't have the power to unilaterally change spending that had already gone through the process, been enacted and signed into law by a president. But however, did within the law made some provision that if some exigency, some event, some rationale existed for saying, well, you know what, when you pass that, the world changed for X, Y, Z reason. So what the law says is if a president says, you know what, we don't need to spend the full appropriation, they have a mechanism in the statute in terms of how you do that, which is you send notice to Congress, and Congress has 45 days to respond to it. Can say yes or no, and And that gives some flexibility to the executive branch, who may feel that there's something that's changed here that, doesn't justify spending it. It clearly does not contemplate having a blanket across the board freeze or, just arbitrary conditions being added to every program, which is what, again, the executive orders that people are wrestling with right now are kind of dealing with. So, I've been talking to our Attorney General, William Tong, who, along with 22 other Attorney Generals, is in court in Rhode Island right now in front of Judge McConnell there. And there may be a decision later today because they had argument, which would basically make permanent or a permanent temporary restraining order as opposed to the 5-day order that came out on Tuesday. And I've been texting back with him because, the question is bigger than just what the memo was on Monday night, as I heard up at UConn, and as we're hearing from other grantees, which is, they're now, basically the position of the budget office is that, in order to get this money, even if the freeze is lifted, you still have to adhere to X, Y, and Z conditions. And I don't think based on, those two provisions, which are pretty bedrock law, that really the executive branch does not have that authority to just do that willy-nilly. Again, if they want to do DEI and no Green Deal and all this, you can do it, but you're going to do it in next year's budget, okay? When the president sends over his budget for 2026, he can add to it whatever he wants in terms of, and his supporters in Congress, they're free to put those conditions, but you can't reach back and change a law. And really that's sort of the fundamental principle. I think this issue is going all the way. I think it's going all the way to the Supreme Court because I think the new budget director, Russell Voigt, is a true believer that, that law is unconstitutional, the Budget Control Act. He said that, he's written about it. I know this guy, I dealt with him when he tried to cut a submarine back in 2020 when he was in the budget office once before, completely overruled Navy leadership when he did that, and we succeeded in reversing it. But, this guy is a true believer in terms of what he thinks presidential authority is. And really, if you think about it, it almost basically renders Congress as moot, really. And, they use language, well, Congress just gives directives. It's not, we don't have to follow that. And it's just like, no. That's not what the founders, explicitly did. One commentary some historians always note is that when they wrote the Constitution, James Madison in particular, he gave Article 1 to Congress. In terms of the priorities in their minds about which branch is the predominant branch, it was Congress. The executive branch, and as you know, the power of the presidency was actually not that big a deal until the early 20th century, was really just to execute and to faithfully follow what the law is. So anyway, we're going to be following the litigation. We're obviously, looking for folks and encouraging folks to contact our office if they're really feeling like they're trapped right now. And as I said, as I found out at UConn, really the scope of this and the breadth of this is enormous in terms of the impact that it's having on folks. So the next slide, I think most of you know, the government right now is going to shut down on March 14th if we don't finish a fiscal year 2025 full budget. Again, in December, at the insistence of Speaker Johnson, because we actually wanted to just get the full budget done for the year and just kind of pivot to the next year, but he refused to do that. So we ended up with a continuing resolution that, again, runs out on March 14th. At the same time, as I think many of you know, there's a reconciliation package which the White House and their supporters are trying to put together. They were down in Mar-a-Lago this weekend, having meetings with Speaker Johnson and most of the House Republican caucus. Again, what they're hoping to do, because reconciliation allows them to pass a bill with only 51 votes in the Senate, they don't have to get pass the filibuster provision. So they're going to try and, I mean, their plan is one big, beautiful bill, stuff as much into it as you could possibly can. Obviously, extending the tax cuts is the number 1, 2, and 3 priority of the president. And so that's sort of also, in the background here in terms of what's going on. On Saturday, tariffs are scheduled to go into effect for Canada and Mexico, 25%. President, again, reiterated that last night. My only comment on that is, one of, I think, the great achievements of President Trump's first term actually was passing the USMCA trade agreement, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, where we basically updated NAFTA. And it was passed with actually a really impressive bipartisan majority. I voted for it. I didn't vote for probably any other trade agreements in the time I've been in Congress. But it was well done. I mean, they finally put into place, enforcement mechanisms for labor standards, environmental standards, which was always the big complaint on Democratic side. And they updated it to, because NAFTA was written before digital commerce existed, or, technology is so different. And his trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, really did just a fantastic job. I wish he was the Commerce Secretary, which is what he was angling for with the new administration, but a billionaire got it instead. So anyway, but I mean, it's sort of bizarre to see that, we're talking about putting tariffs of 25% on 2 countries that we have a trade agreement with that we really just negotiated. It has a 2026 review mechanism in it too. So it's not like, we're hopelessly stuck, in terms of the USMCA. But I was talking to the folks at Dominion. I mean, one small example locally, if you put a 25% tariff on goods coming in from Canada, the U.S. nuclear power industry basically imports all of its uranium. And Canada is one of the biggest suppliers. We have a couple of uranium mines still open in this country, but basically, that's really the real source of uranium for the U.S. And, why at a time when energy costs are so important, and, Chris and his guys are doing everything they can, and I know we have got folks here from Eversource and other, why you're going to add costs to really the one sector of energy production that actually is now starting to get some real political support is just, So personally, I think that it may go into effect tomorrow, and then I think you're going to hear the big deal got negotiated, and it's going to go away. The Colombia trade war lasted 10 hours, so I think that's, and I mean, frankly, that's good for the country in terms of if that were to be the case. I mean, clearly the issues of fentanyl and immigration are what they want to try, what the president's hoping to accomplish, and fair enough. Personally, I think we also, as Americans, should be concerned about the fact that gun smuggling coming out of the U.S. into Canada and into Mexico is a huge problem for those countries, and that we need to, do our part to help them with their own public safety issues. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And that's something that both governments have actually raised as something. If you want to start talking about, public safety and border issues here, then let's talk about firearms, that again are just coming in, gushing in when we're there. The confirmations, I'm not in the Senate, so I'm not in that bar fight, but those are still sort of moving along. And then obviously there are just countless other executive orders that have just flooded out of this administration. If you go back 4 years ago to 2017, President Trump issued one executive order on day one and didn't do another one for about a month or so. So obviously, there's a strategy here to flood the zone. And they have been actually doing a pretty good job, certainly, of doing that. One other order was taken to court, the birthright citizenship issue, which is something that is guaranteed in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And the judge in Oregon, who was a Reagan appointee, I mean, I think the first sentence of the opinion was, "This is blatantly unconstitutional." And despite what the press secretary said, a president can't change the Constitution because he thinks something in the Constitution is unconstitutional. I mean, it's kind of a, circular sort of topic that's there right now. So anyway, and I'll stop after just sort of saying, people are obviously asking, well, what can you do? You're in the minority, are they talking to you on the other side? And, honestly, in terms of the reconciliation package, the answer is no. There has been no communication, and, Leader Hakeem Jeffries has said, you got my phone number, you guys want to talk, let's talk. And the budget, for March 14th, there actually has been some bipartisan meetings going on. Rosa DeLauro is right there at the helm, as the leader on the Appropriations Committee. And there's, I talked to her last night, and they're making some progress, but they have this feeling like they're not 100% sure who's the final decision maker in terms of who they're negotiating with that's there. But right now, the House of Representatives, I know a lot of you follow politics really closely, but if you look at the majority that Speaker Johnson has right now, it is wafer thin. Mike Waltz, who was a friend and a fellow member on the House Armed Services Committee, resigned his seat last week to take on his job in the administration. So that reduced their majority from 219 to 218. And Elise Stefanik is next up to resign, and that's going to take them down to 217. 218 is a numerical majority in a chamber with 435 members. You can do the math. This is a lot different than in 2017. When Trump was elected in 2017, they had a majority of close to 240 when Paul Ryan was Speaker. So he could basically tell some people to get lost, on his side, and he could still pass the tax bill. And that actually happened. There were a number of Republicans who voted no because of the salt cap that was put into the law that was there. They're at a place right now where they can't give away any votes. And some of the issues that are included in the reconciliation package in terms of raising the debt ceiling, there's just no way he's going to get people, a sizable group of people in their caucus to support that type of measure. In the last Congress, we had to step in and avoid default in May of 2023, and then every shutdown that occurred, and there was 3 cliffs that we ran into. Democrats, sometimes really with very little sort of heads up, but we stepped forward to keep the lights on and keep the government moving. One of the former ambassadors from Australia, this guy Kim Beasley, wonderful man, and we're really good friends, but he sent me I don't know if it was a Christmas card or a birthday card or whatever, but he said in the Anglican Church, in their prayer book, one of their prayers is to pray for quiet governance, which I remember reading it thinking, that's a really weird thing to say at church, but actually they were on to something there. So anyway, well, thank you all for being here today, and look forward to looking at you.